ready to get out in the garden yet. For those of you who are a few weeks away from being able to do that yet, you can still enjoy the gardening experience with the plants that you have started indoors. In today's video, I'm going to talk about how to get your seedlings ready to get out into the garden, as well as how to plant them so that they can quickly get established and you'll soon be harvesting from them. I'm going to share with you some tips on how to get your seedlings into the garden with the least amount of stress, as well as some mistakes to avoid. Now, this video is the third in a series on starting your seeds indoors in order to get a jump start on your garden. In the first two videos, I shared with you how to start your seeds indoors, as well as how to care for them as they grow. If you happen to miss any of those first two videos, I've included links in the description below. For those of you who are new to this channel, my name is Linda, and I'd like to welcome you to Veggy 360. Before we get started though, hit the subscribe button so that you don't miss out on any future videos. Depending on how early you started your seeds or what the weather is doing, you may find that your seedlings are starting to outgrow their pots before it's time to set them out in the garden. You therefore will need to pot up or move them to a larger container so that they don't get root bound. Roots can run out of room as the seedlings grow, and the roots will start circling the bottom of the cell, and then they won't be able to take up the nutrients as well, and the seedlings will get stunted. Healthy, well-developed roots will lead to more productive plants, so you want to pot up early and as often as necessary. Now, to know when to pot up, you want to look for roots coming out of the bottom of the pot. If you gently lift the seedling out of its container and you see the roots starting to circle the bottom of the pot, then it's time. Or if the plant looks larger than the size of relative to the size of the pot, that's also a good sign. Potting up is a very easy process. All you need is a good quality potting mix, pre-moistened of course, and containers that are up to 2 times as large as the container that the seedling is in now, and make sure that it has good drainage holes. Now, transplanting can be a shock for the seedling, so if you're going to do this outside, make sure it's on a cloudy day or do it in the shade. And make sure that you water thoroughly before you begin. To pot up, start by putting a little bit of potting mix at the bottom of the container, just so that you have a layer of potting mix for the roots to sit on. Gently tip the seedling out of its container so that you're not damaging the roots or the stem. Now, I like to keep as much of the potting mix around the roots as possible so that I'm minimizing the amount of disturbance to the roots. Place it in the container at the proper level, then backfill with pre-moistened potting mix. Press lightly to eliminate any air pockets. Tomatoes can actually be planted a little bit deeper than other seedlings because any portion of the stem that is buried will actually grow roots to help support and feed the plants so that it will grow stronger. Peppers and to a lesser degree eggplant can also be planted deeper, especially if they're leggy. Water it in thoroughly and tap the side of the pot to help settle the potting mix and remove any air pockets. You want to backfill any of the potting mix that does settle in so that you're topping it off. You want to make sure that you add a label so that you know what variety you're planting. For me, I have over 20 varieties of tomatoes that I typically plant, so labels are critical. Water it in thoroughly from the top to make sure that you've fully settled in that potting mix, but then I also water from below using the lid from this takeout container. Once temperatures are above 45 degrees Fahrenheit or 7 degrees C during the day, you can start hardening off your seedlings to get them ready to set out into the garden. Hardening off is simply a process to help your indoor plants get used to being outdoors. It exposes them to the direct sun, the wind, and colder temperatures. The goal being to toughen them up in order to reduce transplant shock when you do get them into the garden. Now for your cooler weather crops like spinach, kale, and collard greens, this was actually a shorter process, taking only about 7 days. But for the less cold hardy crops like tomatoes, peppers, and eggplant, it can actually take up to 14 days. Now, if you plant your seedlings in the garden without first hardening them off, you actually risk losing them. The plants can actually get sunburned just like we do. You remember that first day that you go out to the beach without sunscreen after being indoors all winter long? Same thing can happen to the plants. And they're also not used to the colder temperatures, so they can go into shock and get off to a slower start. So it's important to harden them off properly. To harden them off, start in a sheltered spot, one that has light shade and is protected from the wind. Set them out for 1 hour the first day, then increase by 1 hour each day, gradually moving them to dappled sun and gentle wind. You want to make sure, though, that you're not setting them out on windy days, because that wind is just going to beat the thunder out of them and they're going to get all dehydrated. After 2 to 3 days in dappled sun, you can move them to morning sun. Gradually expose them for longer periods of time to the direct sunlight. I found that I actually need to set a timer on my phone because I have forgotten them outside in the past too many times. They've gotten overexposed, which has set them back. As they become acclimated to the outdoors, you can actually start leaving them outside overnight once the temperatures overnight are consistently above 40 degrees Fahrenheit or 4 degrees C for the cold hardy plants, or above 50 degrees Fahrenheit, 10 degrees C for the less cold hardy plants. Once your seedlings are fully acclimated, the weather has settled, and the soil has warmed, then your plants are ready to be put out into the garden. For the cool weather crops such as spinach, kale, and collards, this typically happens about 2 weeks before your last average frost date. But for most seedlings, this is after your last average frost date, except for peppers and eggplant. These veggies like really warm soil, so wait about 2 to 3 weeks after your last frost date for the soil to get warm enough for them to be happy. Otherwise, they're just going to sit there and do nothing. When setting your plants out in the garden, you want to space them properly to give them enough room to grow healthy and strong. I'm using the square foot gardening spacing for planting these collard greens, which is 4 plants per square foot. Dig the hole first in order to minimize the amount of time that the roots are exposed to the sun and the wind, and handle the root ball very carefully, gently tipping the plant out of the container, while keeping as much of the potting mix around the roots as possible. Set the plants in the hole at the proper depth, and as I mentioned earlier, tomatoes, peppers, and eggplant can be planted a little bit deeper as the roots will form along any stem that is buried. Beets and lettuce, however, like their roots to sit right below the surface, so plant these more shallow. Once you have them planted, you want to make sure you put a label on there so that you know what you've planted, and then water thoroughly and deeply. If the plant is root bound, gently tease the roots apart at the bottom to direct the roots outward before planting so that the roots will grow into the soil instead of continuing to circle. Once your seedlings have all been planted, you're going to want to protect them against sudden cold snaps or high winds. You can do this with either a floating row cover or you can use a cloche. Here's some examples. It can be as easy as the bottom cut out of a milk jug or this animal cracker container, or you can use an upside down tote from a dollar store, or you can buy this legit cloche, which is perfect for the taller plants. The key thing, though, is you want to make sure that you ventilate it properly, like by taking the lid off or by removing the cloche completely so that your seedlings don't get overheated. If you learned something from today's video, please hit the like button and subscribe so that you don't miss out on any future videos. Thank you for watching. Bye-bye now.